Hello and welcome back to this damnful idealistic crusade. In this video, I'll be going over all of my local store Laserdisc finds from the past couple months. So this is currently all I've picked up for the rest of the year. And as usual, it's a really random assortment. I never know what will turn up in stores or if there will be anything of note in terms of Laserdisc releases. But as soon as I think the well has dried up, I start finding odds and ends here and there. And then I try to wait for at least having enough to go over in a video, and then before I know it, I have a big backlog. So I have quite a number of titles, and they're all pretty much classic film releases and some later releases as well. So some stuff you don't see all the time, and all of these were exceptionally cheap. So every disc I go over in this video was less than $1 in price, and that is my preferred Laserdisc cost because that means I can amass quite a nice collection without having to spend an arm and a leg. But to start, I'll go over some nice double feature sets, all of which you don't see all too often, and most of them are not only niche titles, but were not printed in great quantities, and some, like this first one, are later pressings. So this first one is a Jack Benny double feature. This is a 1997 MGM UA pressing, bringing together The Horn Blows at Midnight and George Washington Slept Here, with, of course, what was used for the VHS artwork. And as you can see, this is still in the original shrink wrap. But again, it was absurdly cheap, and this is a 1997 pressing with digital audio for both films that you don't often see, and it was handled by Image, so this is coming at the tail end of the Laserdisc era. Both films, again, have PCM digital mono soundtracks, and this puts me one step closer to completion for both my Raoul Walsh and William Keighley shelves in terms of my great director shelves, so this was a no-brainer, and one of the double feature pairings that I've been wanting to get from this sort of run of MGM classic titles done late in the Laserdisc period. Another double feature I picked up is a Universal Encore double feature of Bing Crosby titles, with We're Not Dressing paired with Carole Lombard, and then Rhythm on the River, which he's paired with Basil Rathbone, and the story has a credit for Billy Wilder. Now, this is in the usual Encore style, but it actually does have a really nice gatefold. So each film gets its own little write-up, and then we have the chapter stops. So you get a nice amount of images from each film, some of the original lobby cards, a good breakdown of chapters, and then each film concludes with the original trailer, so both trailers are included. The rear is in the usual general Universal style, and each of these would have had similar artwork split essentially for the VHS releases. And these also nicely have digital PCM mono, so this is when the Encore editions were around in the 90s, and all of them had digital audio, which unfortunately all the prior Encore editions did not. So it took Universal a while to get with digital audio on Laserdisc, but once they did, even all of their Encore editions kept them, and there were some nice double feature sets like this one. From MGM UA, I have the double feature pairing of Gable and Crawford and Dancing Lady, and then Astaire and Rogers and Roberta. So this is a nice pairing of musical titles, but again, with a really stupendous good-looking gatefold. Now, as you can see, this is done in the usual MGM UA style of having tinted production stills, but this one looks really, really classy, and it has more of a write-up, and it's nicely split horizontally, which is very uncommon for MGM gatefolds. Usually it would be kind of haphazardly placed across the gatefold in terms of the overall layout, and honestly, this looks so good that I wish more of the MGM UA gatefolds had looked like this. But each film gets its own disc and has PCM digital mono. Dancing Lady has its original trailer, but Roberta does not. But this is a really nice pairing, a disc that isn't super common, and it's also a way to get another of the iconic Astaire and Rogers vehicles on Laserdisc, and it's nice that both of them had the benefit of a PCM digital soundtrack. Next, I found the MGM UA Miss Marple double feature set of the Margaret Rutherford films Murder, She Said, and Murder Most Foul. Rutherford really being the most famous of the on-screen Miss Marples. Now, the cover is a bit deceptive because this looks like a Laserdisc jacket from the early 90s or so. It's nice enough, but it seems pretty simple. This is also multiple discs inside of a single disc jacket, so you do have to worry about the corners getting dinged up and such. But flip over to the back, and we basically have what would have been on a VHS release for each film, just side by side with the credits and general write up. But you'll actually start to notice if you look closely, you've got the late era MGM Home Entertainment logo, and this was handled by Image because this is indeed, as you can see here, this is a 1999 disc. So this is a super late release Laserdisc from the end of the format here in the US. And both films are actually in widescreen. It's credited as 1.66 to 1 since these were British films. And they do have digital PCM mono soundtracks. So the front cover doesn't really indicate any of that, but if you pay attention, you'll note the modern MGM Home Entertainment logo from the late 90s, early 2000s there, and anytime you see that, you know you've got some sort of late release title. But this is a really nice set to pick up if you can find it. It's not very common, so when it pops up, it's usually rather expensive, so I was astonished to find this for 99 cents. Here's another MGM UA double feature of Jane Powell films with Nancy Goes to Rio and Luxury Liner. This is a 1996 pressing, and it seems like they were really focusing on doing these nice musical sets. So this has a more modern, but still really nice looking gatefold with nice color photographs and still the usual MGM tinted stills. The rear still has the usual design of having images and a brief write-up in the credits for each film side by side, basically joining what would be the back of their respective VHS releases. Both films have PCM mono digital soundtracks, and each film includes the trailer, with each film being on its own disc, which is always nice. But the more I see these nice little double feature releases, the more I'm impressed by them. So I wish there had been more of these around this time in the Laserdisc era, doing these spiffier double feature or multi-feature releases that weren't box sets. But it seems like the main focus was on musical sets like this, and I guess that's because George Feltenstein was still in charge of the division, and that's his favorite genre. But at least they were doing spiffier sets like this. So if you stumble across any of these, they are quite nice, but they seem to have been done in rather limited batches. For Criterion, I picked up the standalone release of The Red Balloon, which has the unique sort of cover design being much more like the early release Criterion titles, and also not having the usual Criterion banner anywhere. So this makes it feel like a standard Janus Voyager collection disc. But we do at least get the Criterion logo here in the bottom, so I guess it was done to not distract from the overall beauty of the image selected. Of course, this is a shorter film, so it is backed with a second film, White Mane, but we have a nice, simple rear cover design with most of the bottom taken up by a nice production image as well. And there's a nice sort of gloss finish on the jacket, which Criterion rarely did around this time period. So it makes it feel a little bit nicer when this is otherwise a standard only release in terms of it being just a standard jacket and a shorter film to begin with. For documentaries, I picked up the standard image release of the classic Thin Blue Line from Errol Morris. And the reason why I picked this up is I was just curious to look at the actual soundtrack, which is credited as Dolby Stereo. And also, I was curious to see what the film transfer was like. This, of course, will be 4:3, and the film was done with a particular limited budget. It's a documentary, after all, but it's seen a variety of transfers over the years, so I was just curious to see what the original image disc looked and sounded like. Otherwise, it's a standard image jacket with obviously artwork in VHS dimensions, but it does have at least a nice gloss finish on the jacket, and again has PCM stereo of the original mix of the film. So again, that's really why I picked it up, is to just look at the transfer and audio. I picked up a lovely Pioneer Special Edition of the classic Mysterious Island. Beautiful original poster artwork in the Pioneer Special Edition type design, but this is notable for it being a brand new transfer of a then unused interpositive, and also had special care paid to the soundtrack. Bernard Herrmann's score was located in stereo, and it was used to make a brand new stereo mix of the film, which is on the digital tracks. Then the analog tracks have the original mono mix on the left channel, and then the right channel has Herrmann's score in an isolated music and effects track. And if that wasn't enough, the entire film is presented in full CAV to better study the incredible work of Ray Harryhausen. Now, the only issue with this release is that I believe it's in a 1.33 aspect ratio, which is not ideal, nor is it the original aspect ratio, but that's how most of the Harryhausen films were kind of stuck for the longest time on home video, even in DVD. It just depended on what the studio practices were. But still, this is a really handsome Laserdisc presentation and a gorgeous jacket. So it was always one of the Pioneer special editions I kind of wanted to pick up if I found it for cheap. And I found it for 99 cents, so of course I picked it up. The only issue, as you can see, is there is a little bit of the center of the top part of the jacket has split, but it's nothing major and is the only otherwise bit of wear on this otherwise perfectly fine edition. I also picked up 2 horror titles or horror adjacent titles. The first is not something I particularly needed, but it was always an edition I wanted to check out, and I just didn't expect to stumble across a nice minty copy locally. And that is the Silent Classics Blackhawk Films release of the iconic Phantom of the Opera from Image Entertainment, with the beautiful silver and black or almost bluish design with the really super high gloss reflective quality coating to it. Of course, this is a beautiful display piece as well, but the major draw is that this includes both the 1929 and 1925 versions. The 1929 version has the Gaylord Carter score in PCM stereo. We get a nice little write-up, but there's also some supplements here. So the 1929 version has the 2-color Technicolor ball sequence. The overall tinting is credited as being matched to the original 1925 specifications. And then we also have the trailer for the 1929 reissue version, production stills, lobby cards, and the continuity shooting script as well. And then the 1925 version is included basically on starting on side 3. So the first disc with side 1 and side 2 is the 1929 version plus the supplements, and then disc 2 is devoted entirely to the 1925 version. And as you can see, different runtimes are listed, so I've never gotten to look at this. I knew this contained both versions, and since I love studying all of the weird iterations and seemingly never-ending rabbit hole of Phantom of the Opera versions, I always wanted to check out this particular version on Laserdisc as compared to some of the others, because this is the best overall version, it seems, in terms of being the most comprehensive on the format and actually having both versions. There are later releases that are much rarer and more expensive, but basically the final Image LD was ported over to the first Image DVD, but this is also just a beautiful display piece as well for having this wonderful jacket as part of this series. But if you want the spiffiest presentation of this film in either cut on the format, this is the edition you want to track down. Jumping over to AIP land, I picked up the nice remastered widescreen edition of Master of the World, which of course it's not really a horror film, but it was branching off from the iconic Roger Corman Poe series with Vincent Price over into the land of Jules Verne. And this is a nice remastered disc pressed by Image, so it's a brand new widescreen transfer for the first time, but it also, very importantly, was a brand new audio transfer, because this film actually had a 4-track magnetic stereo mix, and so that was newly transferred for this release, and it's here in digital PCM stereo. And I believe this is matrix to get that 4-channel mix onto this disc. So you'll play this and then engage matrix processing on your receiver. And I'm pretty sure, like all the other Corman Poe films that Orion did new masters for in the Laserdisc era, this was used as the basis of the MGM DVDs, which were used as the basis of the HD masters and the Blu-rays. So if you were ever curious about the transfer history of not just the Corman Poe films, but also other AIP films with Vincent Price, they basically really started when they started doing these 1990s remastered efforts. And it should be said that this is also directed by the should-be known as legendary William Whitney, who is the greatest action director who ever lived, although this was more towards the tail end of his career when he was especially doing a lot of television. He was responsible for the greatest action serials of the form. So he is the man who revolutionized action cinema forever and should always be recognized for that. Now, for notable names and great directors, I start going alphabetically with a Busby Berkeley title, which I honestly is one of my favorites of the Berkeley musicals, and that is Dames, which has this nice standalone release, rather striking artwork, but obviously sized originally for VHS. But unlike some of the other standalone Berkeley releases on Laserdisc, this actually has a PCM mono soundtrack. This has digital sound, unlike, say, the standalone release of 42nd Street. And these can be really fun to look at because they're without any major restoration efforts. They're usually a bit rougher around the edges and were usually the basis of what we saw on the Warner DVDs. But anytime I can look at an iconic film with a Laserdisc that has a digital soundtrack, I'm also picking this up to literally check the audio and see if it's any better than the more modern versions. For Blake Edwards, I picked up a couple titles. This is, of course, The Great Race with original artwork, and this is a Warner disc, so it's nice that this is all across the front of the jacket, so there's no annoying Warner silver bar, but unfortunately, being Warner, there's no gatefold, so it's just the standard black and silver bar on the back, but it looks good enough, and this was the first letterbox presentation of the film. This has a digital PCM soundtrack in stereo, and I presume this will have a Matrix track in it because this was a big roadshow film as well. But the obviously this is not as fancy as the packaging on the beautiful Japanese version that I have, but this was so cheap, I decided to just pick it up just to do transfer comparisons anyway. Of course, I also picked up 1971's Wild Rovers, which unfortunately was heavily cut down on its original release, so it was really compromised. And it wasn't until really this Laserdisc release that you were able to properly experience the film with about 20 minutes or more of material restored. So, starting with this Laserdisc and going all the way to the Warner Archive Blu-ray, you can actually see the film properly on home video, and you'll see it and wonder why it had such a bad reputation on the original release. Well, it's because it wasn't really the actual film. It was compromised and cut down. But this is one of the underrated gems of Edwards' career, which most of his career is underrated gems, but this was one of the MGM Laserdiscs that undid a lot of wrongs. So it's like the release of Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, which was of the first preview version, and also letterbox like this release. So this is one of those important LDs that undid some studio wrongs in terms of restoring a film to its original runtime and doing a new transfer and having PCM audio. There's also a rather nice gatefold, but of course, it being MGM, we've got the tinted stills, but the layout's really nice. So I think they had finally gotten a handle on their gatefolds by this time in terms of the layout. The film is spread across 3 sides, and this being the complete full-length version, this does have an overture, it has an intermission, interact, and of course exit music. Then we conclude with not only a vintage featurette made during the production of the film, but also the original trailer, and then the rear image is beautifully chosen. So this is exceptionally well done, and I believe this is also another PCM stereo track that's got matrixing information in there. I don't think it's mono, but basically you've got the beautiful Warner Archive Blu-ray you can pick up from a new master and scan, but you can also get the Laserdisc, and I've been wanting to get this to compare the audio on here to what we have on the lovely Archive Blu-ray. Now, this is not the fancier AC3, or I should say Stealth AC3 reissue, but it was only a few cents, and I decided I'd pick it up just to double check the transfer and look at the audio. But I picked up the initial letterbox release of Victor Victoria with the rather striking artwork nicely printed on the jacket, and of course the later AC3 repressing is the exact same artwork, looks nearly identical, but obviously won't have as thick of cardstock, so this is actually a bit sturdier. This has a rather nice gatefold for MGM at the time, but we still can't get away from just how much they love to tint those stills for whatever reason. The film is split onto 3 sides rather nicely and doesn't include the trailer, but actually, oddly for an MGM disc, actually has color bars and tone as the final chapter, which is more of a Criterion thing. I can't even think of an MGM UA title off the top of my head that specifically lists color bars as the final chapter, so I guess they were trying to act more like Criterion here. The rear is really indicating this is an earlier MGM disc, as we have the write-up taking more of the jacket space, going horizontally, and all the images are at the top. But it looks nice enough. It's nicely done, and the black background really makes it look nice. So this is, of course, letterboxed, and it does have the film's original Dolby Stereo soundtrack, matrixed, of course, on the PCM tracks. So you're getting the original mix in a lossless PCM. So Obviously, this is the more easily available version, but I figured I'd just compare this to other editions because when I find even a pressing like this that's still in really nice shape and it's just a few cents, I'm weak because it's Laserdisc for 50 cents sometimes, and again, I'm weak. Next, for John Huston, I picked up the 1983 CBS Fox release of The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. As you can see, this is still in the shrink wrap, so in far better shape than copies from this era usually are. There's a little bit of browning at the open edge where the shrink wrap isn't covering it, but otherwise it's in great shape. This, of course, will be a direct print transfer of some sorts with analog mono, but the other reason I picked this up is I've already identified that, to my knowledge, the best source of the film's original mono mix is still the late 1980s VHS mastering, and this film never got a Laserdisc with a digital audio track, so the LD from later on with the same art as the VHS only has analog mono, and it's quite possible those were actually based on this mastering. You never really know until you actually get every copy you can of a film and compare them side by side. And I already found it unbelievably troubling that one of the greatest films ever made had its best audio on a VHS tape. So I figured I probably better pick this up while I found a minty copy just to check its audio track. But also, even though they're using random stills, the cover image looks really nice. So it's displayable, although the title being in red is a bit jarring. So you can definitely tell this was earlier on in CBS Fox trying to figure out how to make their jacket designs. Similarly, I picked up this next one because I just decided, well, I've checked every other release of the film in terms of its audio transfers and overall transfer history. Never tried this one, and I'm not going to find another copy this cheap that's still in decent shape. So I picked up the initial release of Once Upon a Time in America, Sergio Leone's final masterpiece. This is still the proper 229-minute director's cut of the film, or I should say the original version of the film, with original poster artwork from Warner Brothers, but this is the original Laserdisc release that is very no frills. It's pan and scanned to 133, but it's really more opened up because this film was not shot in Technoscope or scope at all, so it was originally 185. But this looks rather nice for the time. It's unfortunately not in the best shape because this is 2 discs inside of a thinner jacket, so you're going to get some wear. And unfortunately, somebody put a big pink sticker on the back that I can't get off without tearing the cover. But I just got this to check the transfer and to capture the audio and take a look at it because at present, the best iteration of the film, as far as I'm concerned, is the letterbox Laserdisc, and that's the only way you get the original mono mix of the film. But I just wanted to compare this to that because I also think that letterbox Laserdisc is one of the best mastered LDs I've ever seen, so I'm curious to see what the original version is like. And with Leone films, you really have to check every iteration because you never know when even an old VHS tape or old pan and scan Laserdisc is actually going to be your best source for an audio track. So this is just the one version of America that I haven't tried yet. For Anthony Mann, I picked up the lovely remastered letterbox release of the Cimarron remake from 1960. This, of course, remaking the 1931 classic version, and while not as highly regarded as Mann's other films, it is still technically a Western from one of the greatest directors to ever work in the genre. This is also a later 1997 pressing, basically qualifying it as a late release. It rarely pops up, so I was happy to get this. The jacket, of course, has the usual high gloss finish of late releases. You've also got the credit for Image, who handled all of MGM's later releases. The film is spread over 3 sides with a new widescreen transfer, digital PCM mono, at least I believe it's mono on here, and unfortunately no extras or trailer. Now, because it's multiple discs and a very thin jacket, there's of course quite a bit of ring wear and corner creasing, which is gonna happen when things like this have been kicking around boxes and bins for years, but it's in overall rather good shape, and it's a very uncommon LD. Basically, all of these sort of niche titles or lower number printed MGM titles from like 1996 to 1999 are all uncommon. So this is one I just had in my wish list and never thought I'd stumble across. There is now finally a new scan and master on a Warner Archive Blu-ray that I've been meaning to pick up, but I'll be able to compare that to this now. For Lewis Milestone, I picked up the rather uncommon 1997 pressing of the classic of Mice and Men from 1939 with Burgess Meredith and featuring the star turn for Lon Chaney Jr., this being the other major iconic role of Lenny that he played besides his most famous role as Larry Talbot in The Wolfman. So this is, of course, essential for Chaney Jr. fans. This has a nice gloss finish, nice imagery, but again, it's rather uncommon. I never expected to stumble across this. This was pressed by Image and has a PCM mono soundtrack, but no supplements or extras. And this film's never gotten a super spiffy release since, so it is still available, but this is a very uncommon LD, so of course I snapped it up when I found it in the bins. Also for Milestone, I picked up 1949's The Red Pony in this lovely Republic 45th anniversary set with a similar cover design as you see on the other spiffy anniversary Republic Laserdisc editions. This, of course, is based on Steinbeck and stars Robert Mitchum with Myrna Loy, but this was actually still in the shrink wrap. I merely took that off to show the lovely gatefold. So like a lot of these, you get a nice little write-up, you get some nice color imagery, it's a much spiffier jacket. The film itself is just a single CLV disc spread across two sides. The rear is rather straightforward, but has that same sort of black and gold nice look to it. But there's also some nice printed extras here in the front pocket. That's why this is a gatefold. So like most of the other Republic releases like this, they would put a single disc in a gatefold and then the other pocket have some sort of printed material, and they were usually extremely high quality. So this gives you a full reproduction of two original lobby cards in full color with gorgeous high quality printing on actual cardstock. So basically this is as close as you get to an actual original lobby card, and they're full size with full beautiful printing. So basically this is another sign of Laserdisc being, if you're going to do printed materials, put your money where your mouth is and make them as good as you can and not having to skimp on size or printing quality. Next, for Mike Nichols, I picked up the release of Primary Colors, which is a widescreen AC3 disc and a 1998 film. So this is a rather late release pressing. You don't really see it all that often. Well, this film is obviously based around the Clinton administration in the 90s. I've never gotten to see it, so I figured it would be cool to check out on the late release Laserdisc pressing. And anytime I can find a late release title, anything from 97, 98, or especially 99, or any Laserdisc pressing from the end of the format, I want to check it out because usually the transfers were first rate and you get a really phenomenal Laserdisc presentation, and sometimes you find them like this for dirt cheap. So this is basically a very late Universal release, and it's got AC3 5.1 Dolby Digital plus a backup Dolby Surround Matrix track on the digital PCM tracks. No real extras or trailer or anything, but still, this is a film I've never gotten to see, so I figured I could definitely check it out on a late release pressing. This next one is one I've wanted to pick up for ages just to check out the transfer, and that is for Sam Peckinpah's butchered masterpiece, Major Dundee. This is the Sony, or I should say Columbia, widescreen mastering, the first time the film was available in its original ratio. The artwork is pretty nice, but looks a little bit simple, but it does have a nice gloss finish on it. The only thing is, as you can see, the overall lining of, or I should say lining up of the widescreen banner across the top is off center. So it looks kind of odd because the widescreen banner is at the top edge, practically almost cut off by the top of the jacket because it's not centered down here. I've seen that a few times on some Sony discs from the Laserdisc era, but this is definitely the worst example I've ever seen. Unfortunately, there's no gatefold, so it's very easy to get this with blown out corners and things, but this is still pretty nice in terms of the overall condition. The back has some, at least a nice little write-up, as Sony would always have more text than all of the other studios. And then we have the chapter stops on the bottom. The film is spread on across three sides with a PCM mono soundtrack with the original score store. This, of course, is unfortunately the butchered just over 2 hour theatrical release version, which I do not recommend. Sony did finally restore the film to at least more of its original runtime. The film was never really truly finished. It was taken out of Peckinpah's hands. It was a very troubled production, and had Peckinpah been left alone, it's possible he could have finished it as originally planned, but the plans had never really been fully formalized either, as there had been a lot of back and forth between Peckinpah and the studio even during pre-production. So it was really a cursed film from the start, but it's a film that never leaves the mind and sets up a lot of the precedents that would be followed through on The Wild Bunch. So it's really a truly important stepping stone for Peckinpah's career, and even in the compromised theatrical release version, I think it's a masterpiece. But you really need to see the Sony extended version, which adds about 15 minutes of material back to the film, and it is a much richer experience, even though it's sadly only a small portion of what was also shot and was never shown to the public in any form. That extended version has a new score and a new 5.1 mix. Most releases, thankfully, allow you to still view the extended cut with the original mono mix and score, but I've just picked this up to look at the transfer and to look at the mono mix presentation here. But do keep in mind, this is the extremely compromised theatrical release version. So if you've never seen Major Dundee, definitely get the Arrow Blu-ray set, which has the Sony restoration and a wealth of extras, and watch the extended version first. But if you want the film on Laserdisc, this is really your only option, and it's the only widescreen iteration, and it was the film's first ever widescreen presentation on video. Next, for Arthur Penn, I have the Laserdisc of one of the greatest films of the 1970s, and probably the most underrated film of the 70s, and that, of course, is 1975's Night Moves, which features arguably Gene Hackman's best performance. This is a staggering film, often classified as a detective film or a neo-noir. However you want to classify it, this is probably the most 70s film you'll ever see. It was written by the great Alan Sharp, who also wrote the blistering Ulzana's Rage that Robert Aldrich made, which is one of his best films. So this film really defies genre classification. It is a film for the ages with an unbelievably haunting ending. It has dialogue you wish you could claim that you wrote something half as good. It is unbelievably dark and morose and depressing, and beautifully so, as it just sort of mulls around in it. Most every line of dialogue in this film is endlessly quotable. But we do now have a beautiful new scan and Warner Archive Blu-ray, so I picked up the Laserdisc to look at the PCM mono track on here, and just to be able to compare it to the DVD and the Archive Blu-ray. This unfortunately is not in the original aspect ratio, so it's 1.33 in the usual Warner style, but this does at least have a nice sort of gloss finish on the jacket, so it's at least a little spiffier in terms of a Warner jacket, but the real draw here is the digital audio. But I love that we have the original poster artwork and there's no annoying Warner silver bar. So this is a nice display piece for one of the great films of the 1970s. If you love it as much as I do, you'll at least be able to enjoy displaying the jacket, even though it's not in the original aspect ratio. Next, for Mark Robeson, I picked up the Fox widescreen release of Peyton Place, which is a later Fox disc from 1993. So it's got a nice gloss finish on the jacket. It's a bit spiffier, and we have the sort of shrunk down Fox special widescreen banner on the top. So all of these, plus having the Fox video logo on the front instead of CBS Fox, all of these indicate that this is a jacket design and pressing from later in the 90s. So it makes sense that this is 1993. This also has a much fancier and far better laid out gatefold design with a lot of text, as Fox usually had a lot of text in their gatefold, which was nice. But the layout and design is far superior to what all the early Fox widescreen discs look like, which usually just had a bunch of blank black space because they'd be on a black background and have a few images and rather small text. So this also indicates that this is a significantly later pressing when they had figured out better gatefold layouts. The rear has the usual Fox design, but has a nice sort of light purple lavender background which fits the film, and a slightly modified layout to fit more text in and to look a little bit more modern. So this is what you expect on Fox discs from this era of Laserdisc. Now this does have a stereo PCM soundtrack, as this did have a 4-track mag stereo track on the original release, as it was a premiere CinemaScope title, and most, if not all, Fox CinemaScope films in their premiere engagements had 4-track magnetic stereos, one of the big selling points of CinemaScope as a major format. So here that mix is preserved and matrixed onto the stereo track, so you'll be able to matrix that out. And I just been meaning to have a copy of this film in my collection, and this was in really nice shape, and it's a spiffier Fox pressing, so I of course picked it up. Next, for George Stevens, I picked this up simply because it was in perfect shape and only a few cents, and that is the original Laserdisc release of the iconic Shane. This is the 1982 Paramount release, and it's still in the original shrink wrap, so this is the nicest condition early Paramount Laserdisc copy I've ever come across, and I figured I'd pick it up just to look at the transfer and check the audio, even though this is obviously only analog mono, and I don't expect much from the transfer because this film has had to go through a number of restorations over the years and has really iconic color, so I'm sure they were just transferring whatever print source they had on hand at the time. But the artwork is really nice and much better than your usual Paramount jacket at this time, as the dead space is used up by beautiful original poster artwork imagery, and even the laser video disc corner banner Paramount would use isn't super obtrusive. The rear has lovely images, of course, taken seemingly from stills and lobby cards, so they have a different color cast to them. But again, the condition is absolutely perfect, and it's still in the original shrink wrap, so I couldn't resist for less than $1. And again, this is the mintiest Paramount early disc I've ever seen. So again, I just picked this up more for the jacket condition and just to look at the picture and sound transfer. For King Vidor, I picked up 1934's Our Daily Bread, which he famously made outside the studio system as a sort of experiment, and when it didn't do super well, he went back to working within the studio system. This is a rather uncommon title, and it's a standard image release with obviously VHS-sized artwork, the usual generic jacket. There is, unfortunately, some sticker residue wear and some corner creasing, but otherwise it's in good shape, and it's got the nice image gloss on the jacket. So it's a super uncommon image title to find, so I wish it had a perfect jacket, but I'm not going to complain because it's a rare classic for only a few cents, and I'm weak for cheap Laserdiscs. The rear is the typical image design, obviously generic sort of artwork with at least a nice little bit of information, but the main draw here is that it was a fresh transfer and has a PCM mono soundtrack. Next, for Orson Welles, I finally picked up a good condition copy of Touch of Evil. Now, this is a little bit confusing because this is the Encore Edition release with a version of original poster artwork on a red background. This was done to replace the first version, which of course is going to be the same transfer overall, and it has a different jacket. That release was only analog mono, but so is this one. Unfortunately, this did not get a digital audio upgrade. So this is basically the same situation with the Encore Edition release of the 1931 Todd Browning Dracula, where if you track down the fancier, harder to find reissue Encore jacket like I did, it's the same exact disc inside, basically, just with a spiffed up jacket, and it's pressed a little bit later, and it's usually harder to find. What makes this even more confusing, as you see, this claims it is the complete uncut restored version, which it also claims on the back of the jacket. This is actually the preview version of the film that was uncovered sometime in the 70s or 80s. And then when they brought the film to home video, Universal decided they could try and market it as a sort of extended version, or at least similar to how films were now being marketed with director's cuts, and using that as a means to draw in more consumers, that they were seeing something not on the original release. It would have been nice to have a double disc set, or have a set that had both the theatrical version and this preview version at the time on the format, but unfortunately they didn't do that. They just opted to go with with the preview version. Of course, the film was famously restored using Orson Welles' 58-page memo in 1998, and that thankfully became the sort of standard version for people to look at. But Universal finally started presenting all three versions in the DVD era, and now when you get the film on Blu-ray and UHD, you can look at all three versions, and Universal has completed a 4K restoration and master, which is best viewed on the Eureka UHD. But if you want the film on Laserdisc, this is really the edition you have to look for. But if you have the earlier pressing, you've basically got this. This just has a spiffier Encore edition jacket, but it's also a really nice display piece because it is original poster artwork and it is very striking. And of course, it's Touch of Evil, one of the greatest films ever made. And it's neat to look at an earlier transfer of the then extraordinarily rare and priceless preview version. Although I myself always watched the 1998 reconstruction, I still like to study all three iterations. But still, this is just spiffier, but it's otherwise the same as the old one, and still has the infamous Universal chapter stops of Side 1, no chapters, Side 2, Chapter 1, original trailer. So if you accidentally hit the chapter button with your remote, it skips to the end of the disc to show you the trailer. So don't forget and accidentally do that. But I just always meant to pick this up because I've wanted to look at the LD transfer and finally found a really nice condition copy of the spiffier reissue jacket. For William Wellman, I picked up the iconic Oxbow incident on the CBS Fox pressing with a beautiful still and very thick gloss. So this is the classic sort of Fox look for their classic titles on LD. As you can see, the bottom bar has this sort of bluish tint to it. This is in absolutely perfect shape. The only downside, I didn't even see it at first, is there's a little tiny hole punch that's sort of obscured by the jacket inside. You can see it coming through on the rear there a little bit. But otherwise, it's in perfect shape, and we still, again, have the thick gloss on the jacket, so it's also a nice display piece. The rear is the usual CBS Fox style with a bit of text about the film, and of course had a new transfer done for this, and has the original monomix and PCM. But I like to pick up these Fox titles when I can, when they're a nice shape for cheap, because a lot of times I find the audio tracks on here, especially when they're PCM, can be better than every other version, and some, like Laura, are so head and shoulders above every other audio presentation of the film that it literally makes you go, what the heck are they doing? So that's another reason why I picked this up. Then for Robert Wise, I picked up the classic Blood on the Moon. This is the collector's edition, and of course is notable for it being an image disc with an exclusive audio commentary on the analog track. And here I love that they have a shot of Robert Wise actually recording this track in 1994. There's also excerpts from a Robert Wise documentary and the original trailer. And of course, the original mono soundtrack is in PCM digital on this release, which had a brand new transfer done for this. There's also a rather nice extensive write-up. Now, this film has not had a whole lot of releases since. There was basically a DVD port of this master, and now we finally have a new scan on the lovely Warner Archive Blu-ray. But for whatever reason, they didn't include the commentary. So this is one of the LDs that's super important for having an exclusive commentary with a legendary figure, really, as Wise as one of the great American directors, and beautiful artwork. So if you managed to stumble across this, this is one of the LDs you have to have in your collection for an exclusive commentary. And this is a truly great Western that also sort of breaks out of the Western confines. So it's not a typical Western and has elements of it essentially being a psychological Western before that was really part of a recognized genre in the 1950s. Now to move on to the last disc, just going in chronological order. This is one I've wanted to pick up for a while for a true classic that I keep hoping gets a Warner Archive Blu-ray, but it's also from the RKO Classic Collection. So since the calla lilies are in bloom, I finally picked up a copy of Stage Door, which has a rather nice jacket for the RKO Collection, better than their usual sort of generic standard style. Lovely image of Adolphe Menjou, Ginger Rogers, and Katharine Hepburn. The rear is also a nicer, better layout for the jacket, so we get a nice amount of text right up. This is unfortunately film only, of course, but it does have a PCM mono soundtrack, which is the main reason why I wanted to pick it up and compare it to the Warner DVD. This is one of the all-time great actress-led films if you've never seen it before. Sort of mixture of stage drama, or I should say aspiring actresses drama, all rooming in a house together, and also mixing in elements of comedy and tragedy and things. So it's basically a mixture of screwball comedy and aspiring actresses and a sort of behind the stage melodrama, if you will. But it's fantastic for getting so many notable names basically in a house together, and chaos can ensue. Next, I picked up 1939's Idiot's Delight with Clark Gable and Norma Shearer from MGM, of course, in their usual sort of airbrushed over stills approach, but it's a nice layout, rather colorful. The rear is really impressive for it being a standard MGM release of this time. Obviously, still sizing around VHS dimensions, but it looks really nice. The film's on a single CLV disc with PCM digital mono, but interestingly includes not just the trailer, but an alternate ending for the film as well. So this was a no-brainer for me to pick up in the bins. And of course, for my never-ending Jimmy Stewart collection, I picked up the LD release of Ziegfeld Girl, also another MGM musical from MGM UA. This being around the same time period, so they kept playing around with cover designs. So here they've obviously taken the artwork they generated for VHS and just kind of stuck it on one side of the LD jacket, but it looks rather nice still. And we have a really nice gatefold. This one is beautifully laid out, and interestingly, for once, MGM didn't tint any of the stills, so I find that kind of funny because that was always their thing. But the entire gatefold is used up for lovely images, and then the chapter stops are placed on the rear, where interestingly, we once again see a listing for color bars and tone. So I guess MGM did that more times than I realized. But this also has PCM digital mono and is a nice release that you don't see pop up all the time, so I figured I might as well pick this up too. Of course, MGM made a lot of musicals and released a lot of them on Laserdisc. So I also picked up 1944's Two Girls and a Sailor with really nice artwork, although it's just messing around with colorizing stills as usual. There's a really nice gatefold. The film is spread across 3 sides and includes the original trailer. The rear is a usual MGM rear cover design layout, but has a nice bit of text about the film and gives you the all-important digital sound credit. Next, from 1946, another RKO collection title, I picked up Sister Kenny, which interestingly was not only written by Dudley Nichols, but also directed by Nichols, who was basically one of John Ford's great screenwriting collaborators. He wrote some of Ford's most famous classics, including Stagecoach, most famously. So I've always meant to see this, and this is actually a copy that was still sealed, so of course I picked it up. So this is in basically perfect shape, but is otherwise movie only on a single disc with a PCM mono soundtrack and the standard RKO collection jacket design. I also picked up one of the iconic Cary Grant vehicles, which of course is Mr. Blandings Builds His Dream House with Myrna Loy. This was done by Image, so it's a standard Image release with a nice gloss on the jacket, but otherwise rather plain. The best part is that they use some form of original art, but still sized for VHS dimensions. The rear is also pretty straightforward, but at least has an original image, and this has digital PCM mono, which is the main draw for me. It's cool to look at an old video transfer, but I'd like to get these to compare the soundtracks. This did finally get a new Warner Archive Blu-ray release from a new scan, so I'll be comparing this to that eventually. For Republic, I picked up the 1950 classic Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye, which is a Cagney vehicle following in the wake of the massive success of White Heat, and this is actually a very underrated film. This is in the Republic style of this time in terms of having a sort of tilted image and having this type of layout with a sort of generic color mixed with black. It does include the original trailer as it credits, and it has digital PCM mono. And for Republic titles, or titles handled by Republic, usually their Laserdisc digital audio is quite often the best source for the film's audio. So I've been wanting to pick this up to check out the transfer anyway, and I've been wanting to rewatch this film for far too long. And this also has at least a nice gloss finish on it. So even though it's not super deluxe or anything, it feels a bit more premium than a standard release. Now, jumping ahead quite a ways, this is a title I never thought I'd find just floating around in the used bins. It's a film that unfortunately has been out of print for quite a long time, and this is one of your best options, is to find this rare out of print Laserdisc. This is the elite release of The Stepford Wives with original poster artwork, a brand new transfer done specifically for this release from elements derived and the original magnetic mono source. So this also has the original mono mix and a brand new transfer as digital PCM. The jacket artwork is quite striking, and there's a nice, really thick gloss finish on it. But unfortunately, there's no major extras or anything on here. It's just a new transfer of the film on a single CLV disc. But again, this is very uncommon. You definitely usually have to pay more around the $25 or more range for this because the film has been out of print for so long and really needs a new 4K master badly, especially for its extremely iconic status. But I just never expected to find this floating around, so of course I snapped it up immediately. Next, I picked up 1986's Murder by the Book, which is, I think this was originally done for television, and it's basically a what if about Agatha Christie in writing one of her books. I've read about this but never gotten to see it, and it's a really nice looking jacket, so I figured I'd pick it up, and it has PCM digital audio as well, so since I had picked up the Miss Marple double feature, I figured might as well make it a triple feature. From 1990, I picked up Adventures of Ford Fairlane with Andrew Dice Clay from the sort of Joel Silver factory of wonderfully overzealous, over-the-top late 80s, early 90s action films, and of course this is directed by Rennie Harlan. This has the rather striking original poster artwork on a Fox widescreen jacket, and of course has the usual Fox layout, but with a really striking blue background. It's just a single CLV disc with a widescreen transfer, the original mix as Dolby Stereo, matrixed on the PCM digital tracks, but it's also one I don't see pop up very often, and when I do, it's usually beat up. So I picked this up because it was in nice shape, and I haven't seen this film in years, so I'm going to rewatch it on Laserdisc. Next, I picked up 1992's White Sands, which is a lovely Warner release. In terms of the way it's designed, it's using original art, but it almost makes it look more like a generic Laserdisc or a pan and scan release or something. But this is actually a full-on spiffier Warner jacket, widescreen transfer with Dolby Surround PCM. And it's also a film I've never gotten to see, so I picked it up because, of course, it's been on my to-watch list, and it's an actually solid Warner jacket that's an actual widescreen transfer, and it was only a few cents. So basically, it ticked all my boxes. Next, I picked up 1995's Last of the Dogmen from HBO Video, pressed by Pioneer in this widescreen release that I've never really seen before, so it just seemed interesting enough, and it was in perfect shape with a Dolby Stereo PCM soundtrack, and it was only a few cents. So again, nice looking LD of an interesting looking film I've never gotten to see for less than $1. I'm weak. I'll admit it. I will buy cheap Laserdiscs. It's a problem. Now, the last couple of releases are all late titles. These are all films from 1997 and later, which means pressings from late 1997, if not 1998 or later. So I'm always going to pick these up when I find them for cheap, simply because they're late releases to begin with, but usually they'll all have fantastic transfers. Now, this first one is Fierce Creatures from Universal, which is basically the follow-up to A Fish Called Wanda with the same lead cast members. Of course, it has the late period Universal widescreen banner. Nice enough jacket, good layout design, just film only, but unfortunately Universal basically cheaped out and didn't include an AC3 Dolby Digital 5.1 track, so this just has Dolby Surround, and the DVD actually would have 5.1, so this is one of those late LDs that you get just to look at the transfer, but keep in mind they cheaped out and didn't include the 5.1 soundtrack. This next one never pops up, and it can go for quite a bit, so I was really surprised to find it, and that is Hard 8 from Paul Thomas Anderson. Really nice jacket that has this nice sort of maroon aesthetic to it, and it is a nice display piece and attention grabbing. Again, unfortunately, they did not spring for including a 5.1 mix, so this is just Dolby Stereo matrixed PCM, But the jacket, again, is really, really nice. There's a good amount of text because this is a Columbia disc, technically, and it's still in really good shape as the jacket. The reason why it was so cheap is this is an ex-rental copy, so the disc has a lot of scuffs, but it seems to play through just fine, so I picked it up because it was hard eight on Laserdisc for less than $1, and I've been meaning to rewatch this film for ages, and this is definitely one you never expect to see in the bins. Next is a Warner release of Murder at 1600, a Wesley Snipes vehicle with Diane Lane. Really nice, striking artwork, very thick gloss on here, as most late Warner discs would be, and your usual late Warner type layout on the back with the chapter stops on the side, the film spread onto a single two-sided CLV disc, widescreen transfer with both Dolby Stereo, Matrix PCM, and they sprang for the AC3 5.1 track, so this has the Dolby Digital mix as well. This should have a really nice transfer, as pretty much all Warner discs from the last couple years of LD all look really great. From New Line and Image, I picked up 1997's One Night Stand, also with Wesley Snipes. This directed by Mike Figgis. I've never seen this film, never gotten to see it, but it's sort of been on my radar, so figured it'd be fun to watch for the first time on LD. The jacket has a nice sort of gloss finish, and the layout and artwork is quite nice. And also, this has an audio commentary from the director on Analog Track 1. There's also a Dolby Surround PCM track and Dolby Digital 5.1, so they didn't cheap out on this release. So this is another nice late release and also AC3 late release disc. From Paramount, I picked up the widescreen release of Switchback, which is rather uncommon. Really nice, striking original poster art used for the entirety of the Laserdisc jacket. The rear also has great artwork and a nice design. Otherwise, it's just a standard film-only disc. But it does look like they cheaped out, and this does not have AC3, so it's hit or miss from the end of the era if studios would put AC3 on a disc or not. So this seems to only have the Matrix Stereo Dolby Surround track on the PCM tracks. And then to close out with two films I've never seen but picked up because they were late releases. This is Welcome to Sarajevo, which is a widescreen release with a really nice thick gloss. It is an ex-rental copy, so there's this sticker I can't get off, but otherwise it's in perfect shape. I don't even know if it was ever rented, this is actually a Disney disc in disguise because it's a Miramax title, so it's got the usual sort of Disney layout on the bottom. We have just a single CLV disc with nice artwork. This does have Dolby Surround on the digital tracks, but it doesn't seem to have any sign of AC3, so this will be another that is Dolby Surround only. And then lastly is the late release 1998 film Homegrown, which is a Sony Columbia pressing, hence their deluxe widescreen banner on the top. Really nice thick gloss on the jacket, and it's in perfect shape. And of course, a lot of text befitting a Columbia release, but otherwise a single CLV disc in widescreen, but with both Dolby Surround on the digital tracks, and they actually did include Dolby Digital, so they sprang for keeping the 5.1 mix on here. So this is another title I picked up just because it was a really nice condition late release for cheap, widescreen, and did have the all-important Dolby Digital AC3 as well. So that does it for this batch of what I picked up on Laserdisc in local stores and leading up to being current here. As usual, I never know what I'm going to stumble across, and I try to at least only buy titles I'm interested in or releases I want to check for transfer and audio reasons. But when I stumble across really nice titles or really nice later releases for dirt cheap, then I'm willing to buy more than I probably would. And especially when it's like these, and every single one of these was 99 cents or less, then I'm weak. If it's a cheap Laserdisc, I'm weak. So it makes the format fun to collect because you never know what you're going to find in a way, but it's also frustrating because you never know if discs are going to pop up in your area again, and pricing has gotten very inconsistent, I've noticed. So even at my local stores, what would usually be, a 99 cents or 50 cents or $1 or two, pricing can vary depending on who's working that day. So cheap discs are now being priced for significantly more, or $5 or $10. So I don't get as many of the LDs that come in as I would have in years past. And I know that's something that a lot of people kind of have to deal with in terms of other collectors. So I'm sure I'm not alone in that, and that it's tricky to still find LDs, and it's just kind of whatever turns up, turns up. But nowadays, even the pricing can kind of vary. So, as always, I hope my babblings about collecting Laserdiscs and the fun of the format has been at least somewhat fun and informative. Hopefully, you can find some of these titles if you're interested in them in your local stores or just some Laserdiscs in general, because I know it's very difficult when the sort of flow of new discs coming through just dries up, and it's just luck of the draw if they get any Laserdiscs in or even know what you're talking about if you ask. But hopefully you're able to find some nice titles in your local store. And if any of these are in your collection and you haven't watched them in a while, maybe, dust them off and put them in the player again and give them another spin. So as always, please keep supporting your local independent stores in terms of comic stores, record stores, video stores, whatever you're lucky enough to have. They all need our support to keep going and stay in business, and hopefully you can support them and find some nice LDs in your area. So as always, keep your Laserdisc spinning, keep your players going, keep enjoying the wonderful Laserdisc format, and as always, thank you ever so much for watching.